you have volume up on your...
Oh, is that me?
Hey, everybody. How you doing? It's Chris here at Quilter Labs.
And I'm Brian.
And welcome back to
Welcome to the Q Show.
Another fun weekly podcast to talk more about the Elevate. As per special request, I think someone reached out last week and said, hey, guys, put this on Spotify. What are you thinking? I like to jog, and I like to listen to stuff while I jog. Well, you've got your wish. So now it's actually also available on Spotify. We'll add a link later to this show, or you can just look it up on Spotify, The Q Show.
It's the Quilter Show on Spotify.
Well, that's the link, but yeah, that's because some fella who makes quilts, Did I ever tell you the story about how we used to have little old ladies show up in front of the shop?
I don't think so.
Okay, so back in the early days when back in 2011, 2012, something like that, we put a big sign that said Quilter on front of the building, right? And so what would kind of constantly happen is, I say constantly, but it happened several times, is someone would come knock on the door in the earliest days and say, hey, do you guys sell quilting supplies? Over and over again. So they, not realizing that, we sold guitar amplifiers, kind of maybe the opposite of what a quilting supply would be. But yeah, so that was kind of the, in the earliest days, kind of part of the fun of starting a little guitar amplifier. I remember we actually put Quilter guitar amplifiers underneath it and put that on the front door to help people kind of calibrate themselves. But yes, check us out on Spotify. Give it a listen while you're driving, while you're working, while you're, I don't know, whatever it is you do it. So what did we talk about last week? I think we went over gain.
We talked about editing presets on Elevate, and we also talked about the gain block in depth.
So run me through again, top level. Editing presets, you turn on functions on or off.
Yeah, so to navigate presets, you can use the foot switches, or when you're in preset mode, you can just turn the knob, and then that queues up a preset to recall it. You press the recall foot switch, or you can press the knob. And then to edit a preset, you can do a tap of one of the block buttons to enable it, or you hold it for 1 second to bypass it. In each block, there is some have top level parameters, like master gain and EQ. Others will go directly to a mode, which is like a mini preset for that block.
Right.
And you can select from one of those modes. If you want to get more in depth, you can go to the custom mode and then edit all of the individual parameters within that block.
Cool.
So pretty intuitive.
So that kind of rolls us forward. What questions did we... So following up on questions from last week's live stream.
Yeah. So we had a couple of questions. And I think Marisa did a pretty good job last week of answering several of the questions in the chat. But there was one or two that we thought were worthy of mentioning. And then there were some other questions that came up that either we missed or have just come up since the last week's live stream. So there's a question here asking about the switching between presets. I think what the viewer was asking is, when you switch between presets, what happens? Does it transition smoothly? Does it mute?
Right.
Things like that. So it does transition smoothly. Essentially, it implements kind of a morphing function to morph all the parameters from the preset you started with to the preset that you're ending with.
Right.
And then in addition to that, the echo and reverb have a optional trails bypassing.
Right.
And so you enable that, it's actually down in the custom parameters for both echo and reverb.
And bypassing trails means it
So there it is. The bypass type, you can select trails or normal.
Right.
And so normal means that when you switch or when you bypass that effect or you switch to another preset that has that effect bypassed,
Right.
when a trails is set to normal, it's just going to cut off that reverb decay,
Right.
or the echo regeneration is just going to cut off.
Right.
If you have trails enabled, then it's going to allow that to decay out. The reverb or the echo regeneration is just going to continue to decay out. If your echo or reverb is also enabled in the preset that you're switching to, then it's going to morph to that new value,
Right.
the new decay value or the new regeneration value.
Oh, interesting.
So this doesn't apply to main bypass. So main bypass is this. When you hold down the bypass button, it bypasses everything,
Right.
right?
So then
There's
you can
no
just
trails in
do a
that
level
case.
check basically at that point.
Yeah. So that's essentially how the preset switching works,
Gotcha.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's pretty smooth transition, doesn't mute out or anything like that. And then you have the optional trails.
Well, that's cool because if you have, a part with, glorious reverb and you want to roll into something that's, doesn't have that, you can keep the trails going. So that's, happy trails to you.
And then we were asked about the factory presets. Are these preset upon purchase, or do I need to do a lot of work to get these sounds set up? So you don't need to do anything. They ship with the unit. Everything is set up and ready to play. Of course, you can customize them if you want, and save them as your own user preset.
And you'll want to for sure, just because your instrumental sound different or whatever. And yeah, I think this show we're going to be covering EQ, and you'll see what kind of why you want to do that.
And then we were also asked if Elevate will have a playlist capability for playing shows, and yes, it does. So
that'll be a topic of another video.
yeah.
But-
So you
yeah.
can have up to 50 lists that you can create, and each list can have up to 50 presets on it.
So for those of you who have more than 50 shows that you play and they're all different, well, sorry, you're out of luck. Nah, you can edit these on pretty easily.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to set up. To access the list, you just press both the preset foot switches at the same time. That brings up your list menu, and then you can. Right now, we only have one list set up, the example faves, and so you can select that and press recall, and then it goes to that list, and then you have to select the preset on that list, and that's all there is to it. So let's go back to where we were. Now I got to go back and find the preset we were going to use to demo.
47. Oh, presets all have numbers, by the way. So
yeah, when you use the knob, it'll show you the preset number.
Yeah.
If you like to see the number.
And a few viewers, I think, asked about price, which is without getting into a long belabored conversation about tariffs and the state of the world right now. I'll say this much: is we're committed to the initial run, one way or the other, coming out at $499, so $500 basically, and we're gonna make that happen. We're gonna see it through, even if we have to eat tariffs. Then we have to eat tariffs, but that's where we're starting this bad boy out.
Yeah, so if you have questions while we're doing the live stream, just put them in the chat, and we will get to them. We'll try to get to them at the end. So we're not ignoring you. We're just waiting until the end.
Yep. We're trying to stay on script.
Okay, so today we're going to cover the EQs, the EQ blocks, and the cab block. And these are kind of related in that they're essentially both filters,
Right.
to sort of shape your overall tone. So it's kind of nice to talk about these in the same live stream.
Well, and I'm curious, kind of from a basic level, for there's all levels of guitarists are going to watch this at some point in time or another. So what is your basic, theory of EQ? What is EQ doing, in a general sense, top level? I know this is a
Top
deep,
level.
loaded question.
Yeah.
Don't expect him to answer the whole world. There
it's
could be
deep.
books on this.
Well, yeah. It's also pretty open-ended there. So essentially, you're shaping the frequency response.
Right.
Okay. And there are different types of filters you can use to do that. And I think most guitarists have a fairly good concept of what your basic EQ does, your low, mid, high EQ.
Yeah.
That everybody has.
Bass, mid, treb.
Or bass, mid, treb.
Yeah.
But there are other ways in which you can shape your frequency spectrum.
Right.
And so, the cab block essentially is another type of filter.
Right.
And that's all there is. It's nothing. It's not magical or anything. It's just a different type of filtering that you can apply to shape your tone.
Gotcha.
And we'll get into a little more depth here in a little bit.
Well, and yeah, cab block does a few other things too besides the basics of So they're different animals in different positions relative to the signal path, which
So I guess the way that I would say that the cab block is different is that so an EQ, like as I mentioned, you're kind of familiar with that. You're boosting a certain broad part of the spectrum, right?
Right.
So you turn up the low EQ, you're boosting the lows.
Right.
A cab block, sort of in its most basic sense, is band limiting the frequency spectrum.
Right.
You're essentially lopping off everything below a certain frequency, or most everything below a certain frequency, and most everything above a certain frequency.
Right. Which makes sense because in real life, that's kind of what the typical 12 or 10 or 8-inch speaker, for that matter, has a certain frequency response. You can actually look up the curve for the speaker, and the cabinet itself plays a role in shaping that.
Yeah.
So that kind of stands to reason. So you don't expect to have a lot of fizzily high from a 12-inch, speaker that's dark, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
And so anyone who's tried to record direct without going through a speaker or a speaker emulator
Right.
will know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to be really thumpy and really fizzy.
Yeah.
And so the cab block will just remove those parts.
Right.
And you can control how much of that you want to remove.
Right.
And that's sort of, in essence, what's happening. Now, an actual speaker is going to do more stuff in addition to that. And some of that kind of overlaps with what an EQ will do.
Right.
And my preference is not to try to have two different functions doing the same thing.
Right.
Because it just makes it more difficult to use.
Well, yeah, it's more complicated.
And you have things that are interacting with one another. You could have one thing that's undoing something you're trying to do in the other block. So I like controls to be as independent as possible.
Right.
So as much as we could, we tried to keep the filtering functions in the cab block independent
Right.
of anything that you could do in the EQ block.
And that kind of naturally, when I was developing presets for this thing, one of the first things I did was get the gain structure set correctly, and then immediately turn my attention to cab next. So it's funny that you say that. And I'll probably do a video on this at some point. But that actually had more. It seemed it's almost like if you're setting it up, you get an amplifier and you get a speaker cab first, and then you start doing all your shaping to try to get your tone. It seemed like it kind of followed real life in that respect. So I noticed I had the same kind of the same results if I'm trying to dial in a specific sound. I would turn the, get the gain, find the mode. We call them modes, right? Mode. I'd select the right mode that sounded closest and do the same thing with cab. And if I could get 90% of the way there, then I only had to do a little bit of tweaking in EQ to actually accomplish it.
Yeah.
So that, it stands to reason. In a lot of ways, it's like picking an amplifier, picking a speaker, and then, getting all your auxiliary stuff set up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's start with the EQ blocks,
Okay.
and then we'll move on to the cab block after we're done with that. So the first thing you're going to notice is we have both pre and post EQ. And so some people might be wondering, like, why do you have both? And so in a general sense, a pre-EQ is going to, especially when you have something with a lot of gain on it, a pre-EQ is going to affect the gain overtones that you get, whereas the post EQ is going to shape the overall response or the overall tone. And so they act very differently when you have a lot of gain. If you don't have a lot of gain or have just a really clean sound or have the gain block bypassed altogether, then those two blocks, the pre and the post EQ, are going to do pretty much the same thing.
Pretty much the same
right?
thing.
So you don't really need both of them if you are
if you're not using gain.
If you're not using gain.
Yeah.
But if you are, then they start to operate very differently. That being said, the way that they are implemented is the same, meaning that all the controls are the same in each of them.
Right.
And we did that to try to keep it simple for people so that you don't have to learn two different things
Right.
for those two blocks. So the way they shape the frequency spectrum is the same.
Right.
Right. But you do have independent controls, so you can set them up completely differently.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you do want them, well, pretty much all the time, you want them to be different.
Right.
So the other thing I will say about pre-EQ versus post-EQ is depending on what type of amps you are accustomed to,
Right.
You may be more familiar with one than the other. So vintage amplifiers typically have their EQs before
Right.
most of the stuff that's going to overdrive in the circuit.
Right.
And so if you're accustomed to vintage amplifiers, the pre-EQ is probably going to be you're going to be more accustomed to the way that sounds.
Right.
Whereas in modern amplifiers, usually most of the overdrive happens in the preamp section, and then that's followed by an EQ.
Right.
So in modern amplifiers, the post EQ is going to seem more familiar.
Yep.
So that's not to say that modern amplifiers don't have pre-EQ. It's just typically it's more fixed. So there's some fixed EQ function that you may not have any control over.
Right. Or if you do, it's like a bright control or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's let's start with I'm just going to pick one. And you'll notice immediately you're presented with your familiar controls, low, mid, and high. And you can press the knob to cycle between those three. And the number that you're shown is in dB. And so that's all very straightforward. If you press the block button again, then you'll be presented with the mode selection. Here's where you get to select what type of EQ you want. I'm going to come back to this, use post EQ frequency EQ. I'm going to come back to that in a bit. So you can select between different types of EQs. There are three. You have the option of 3-band or 4-band. And so some of these kind of loosely mimic what you might find in some amplifiers.
Right.
So in that regard, you can probably find something that is familiar to you if you're accustomed to a certain amp. And then if you go into the custom mode, then here's where you can, basically design your own EQ. So you can select either 3 or 4 bands. I'm going to select 4 bands just so I can show you all of the parameters. And then here you can select for the mid, you can select the center frequency and the Q for the mid. The Q is sometimes called the quality of the filter. It's sort of inversely proportional to the bandwidth. So a higher Q means you've got a sharper or more narrow bandwidth, and a lower Q means you have a broader or wider bandwidth. And then you can also do the same thing for the high. You can select the center frequency and the Q. And you'll notice there's no custom controls for the low and the presence in this EQ. And that's because these are shelves or shelving filters.
Right.
And the frequency is automatically selected to align with the half amplitude of the adjacent filter. So
I feel the need to translate for some of you guitarists.
I'll try to explain this. Okay. So let me go back to the mid.
Right.
And so here I've got the mid selected at 400 hertz with a Q of 1.
Right.
And so that filter is gonna peak up, and then on the lower end, wherever that half amplitude is, and
right.
I don't know off the top of my head where it is, with a Q of 1, it's gonna vary with both the frequency and the Q.
Right.
But the low shelf filter, the half amplitude of that will be set to align with the half amplitude of the mid filter.
Right.
And the reason for that is so that they sum together nicely.
Okay.
Right. So if you have both boosted, you don't end up with an extra peak or hump in the middle.
Right.
Everything kind of sums together nicely that way. And it's sort of you don't have to think about the low or the presence that much.
Yeah, it'll
you
be
just set the
smoother,
gain,
basically,
and everything else will be taken care of for you.
So, for example, on mid, if my guitar tends to be really peaky at 1.2 kilohertz, for example, I can dial in 1.2, increase the Q to kind of notch that down a bit, and then just drop that when I get over here.
Right.
So here it's actually boosted in this particular case, but yeah, I get what you're saying. And this is all still pre-EQ, so this is what we're modifying the sound of the guitar before it hits the gain section.
But all of these controls are all the same for post EQ.
Right.
So what I'm showing you here, everything's going to apply to post EQ. It's just going to sound different because the EQ is post gain rather than pre gain.
Right.
All right. So I said I would come back to this, and this is actually this mode here. Use post EQ, F and Q. So this mode will tell the pre EQ block to use the same mode as the post EQ.
Right.
And the reason for that is it makes complementary EQs a lot easier to set up.
Rather than having to go back and forth and try to make them exactly the same. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So what do I mean by complementary EQ? Well, as it turns out, something that's fairly common in amplifier design, guitar amplifier design, is the pre and post EQ, whether or not you have any control over it, is a lot of times set up to be complementary.
Right.
Meaning that some mid frequency or high frequency is boosted pre-gain, and then it's cut post-gain.
Right.
Now that may not be in the same amount, but typically the frequency of it is going to be set the same.
Gotcha.
And the reason for that is when you have low gain settings, they to some extent will kind of cancel each other out.
Right.
And so you end up with something that sounds more neutral when you're clean. But as you turn the gain up, then you hear the effect of that pre-EQ that's boosting some frequency, and it gives the distortion a certain character.
Yeah.
You know, that's sort of a signature character for that amp.
Right.
And so if you want to reproduce stuff like that, this particular mode makes it easy to do.
Makes it real easy to do, yeah.
And I actually use this mode like most of the time.
Right.
When I'm, if I'm trying to dial something in. The only time I would select a different mode for the pre-EQ is if I'm trying to do something very specific.
Right.
But most of the time I would just set the pre-EQ to just use the same mode as the post-EQ.
And generally I agree that 9 times out of 10, if you don't know what else to do, just use that. You'll get there pretty quick. So if it's actually it's being modified then by the post EQ, do we actually see the settings reflected if we were to go back and look in custom? It would be the same as the post EQ at that point?
So the custom mode will actually, it stores whatever you put in there the last time. So the
Gotcha.
custom mode is like, it actually keeps that as a separate mode.
Got it.
So the only time to overwrite that with a mode is if you actually go into the
Got
mode and
it.
tell it to copy those settings over.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So I thought we'd maybe try to demo the effect of the pre and post EQ.
Cool.
I'm gonna just undo whatever I did there. And so let's see what we've got here. Okay, so we've got a 3-band EQ, center frequency of 1 kilohertz on the post EQ, and on the pre EQ we have it set to use the same frequency and Q as
So case in point.
as the post EQ. Right. So it's already set up as complementary EQ. So that's good. So let's just play with this a little bit so you can kind of hear the difference.
Okay. Just a big chord.
Yeah. So I'm going to copy this to the custom mode. I'm going to exaggerate the settings a little bit so you can hear it.
Wow. Smiley face. Wow.
Yeah, so you can hear all I was doing there was just shifting the frequency down.
Right.
I did increase the Q to exaggerate it a little bit, and I increased the gain settings just to exaggerate it a little bit. But shifting the frequency, you can hear how that changes the character of the distortion.
Yeah.
And since the pre-EQ was essentially linked to the post-EQ,
Right.
the level of boost pre and cut post stayed the same. It's just
Right.
that the frequency was shifting there.
Right.
So you can hear how that affects the overall tone.
Right.
So let's I want to try the same thing, but I want to try it instead of the mids. I want to try it with the high.
Okay.
Let's see what happens. I'm gonna just turn the mids. So there, I was changing the mid, which in turn changes the shelf frequency of the high. And so I boosted the
wow.
high pre
Right.
and cut it a little bit post.
Right.
And so just by shifting that shelving filter, that high shelving filter up and down, you can
Right.
hear how it affects the gain overtones.
Right.
So that's just another example of how complementary EQ might be used.
Right. Well, and again, it simplifies it because it controls both, and it almost doubles the effect, if you will. Almost, not exactly. Well, it's doing it, pre and post gain. So it has
Well, it certainly makes it a lot easier
Yeah.
because once you get your gain set, then you just go in and change the frequency and Q
right,
on the post. You don't have to remember to go and duplicate those settings in the pre.
right.
And so you can instantly hear, like as you turn, you can
Yeah.
instantly hear what it's doing.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's essentially how the pre and post EQ work. And I mean, that's really all there is to it. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's for some people that it may be more complicated if you're not used to, the idea of pre or post. Again, to your point, if you play vintage amps, you're going to tend to want to live in pre-land. If you tend to play modern amps, you're going to want to live in post-land, or which makes sense to a lot of extent. Well, shall we talk about cab?
Yeah.
Come on,
that's
man.
Next.
Can I plug my IRs
Yeah,
into it?
Okay.
Ah!
I'm gonna.
I'll just ask your questions for you right away.
I'm gonna. Yeah.
We got to talk about IRs.
I'm going to. I'm gonna say something controversial now.
Uh-oh.
IRs kind of suck. So I know a lot of people like their IRs and are, let's say, heavily invested in a particular IR or group of IRs.
Well, yeah, sure. You pay money for it.
Right. But there are a couple of reasons why I don't like IRs.
Well, okay. First off, what is an IR? I don't really know. To
that's
be
a good
honest
question.
with you.
So IR stands for impulse response.
Right.
And it's essentially a digitized version of the time response of a loudspeaker, measured with a certain microphone at a certain point, at a certain distance, in front of that speaker.
Right.
And then that time response can be used as a filter to apply to the sound to reproduce the effect of the loudspeaker.
Right.
Now, that particular filtering technique and doing, using an IR will be a faithful reproduction of that loudspeaker at that point using that mic. Okay.
And already I see the problems with that. Yes.
Yeah. So there are a couple issues.
So unless the sound you want is in the laboratory with a specific mic that tested it.
Right. Now you can use a reference mic and you can calibrate for the effect of that mic and essentially remove the effect of that. Some people like, they like the sound of a certain mic. So and you can either create an IR using that mic or also combine the response of that mic
microphone type
with that loudspeaker IR. So,
but it's all shaky ground, because let's face that's one of the problems. Henceforth, the anti-modeler moniker. That's the shaky ground of okay, so you mic'd this one speaker this way, you mic'd that one speaker that way, and what's your reference point? At the end of the day, is it that you want to have you want to feel good that you're so in a way I'm with you. I follow you on this. I understand why people want them. I understand conceptually why I love the sound of a creamback speaker, and so I want that exact sound. But I just said it. I want that exact sound. I don't care personally, particularly how I get there. I just want that sound,
I mean, the first issue, and there are three issues as I see it.
Right.
The first issue, I think you're touching on,
right,
which is what is the sound of that speaker?
Right.
Is it at that specific point in front of the loudspeaker,
right,
with the mic like so many inches off the cone at a certain angle? Or is it how that speaker sounds
inside
in a room, right? In
Right.
a room. Now you can get IRs, multiple IRs at multiple angles around the cabinet,
Right.
and combine them and try to reproduce that.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of a pain and it's kind of subjective how you might want to
Well, and that's
do
why I
that
say
in order to reproduce
yeah,
whatever it is that you're hearing.
it's shaky ground
Yeah.
because what might sound exactly right to you may not sound at all like what I remember that creamback sounding like.
Right.
And there you have it.
So, so yeah, there's that, and where you position that cabinet
Right.
in a room is going to change how it sounds.
Right.
Is it on the floor? Is it tilted back? Is it on a stand? Is it close to a wall? All of those things are going to affect the low frequency response.
Right.
So there's just a lot of factors that are difficult to try to reproduce in a predictable way.
Right. And it all begs the question, is that the exact thing you're after still at
Yeah.
the end of the day?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's the first thing that I don't like about IRs. The second thing is that you can't really adjust them. Like you load it up and that's what you got. Now
Right.
you can EQ, you can apply some EQ, but as we've talked about, an EQ is not the same type of filtering that happens, that you're, that like a cab sim would do. It's not,
Right.
so you can't really compensate for things that you might want to change
Right.
in the way that it sounds. So you're just kind of stuck, trying different IRs until
Right.
you find one that you like.
Correct.
Right? You can't dial it in. Is what I'm
Well,
saying.
and that's part of the and again, that's part of the dilemma. If I just want to sound like something, is it that I want to feel good that the digital thing's aligned with my expectation of it, or do I have a tool that gets me closer to what I'm trying to sound like? Right.
Yeah. Right.
The tone I want to hear when I hit the strings.
So, and then that leads me to the third issue that I have with IRs, and this, I think is something that's often missed,
Right.
and it may be the most controversial.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
So,
Brian's
an
gonna
IR,
break the internet today.
an IR, it will reproduce. As I said, it will reproduce the sound of that speaker
Right.
at a certain point in front of that speaker. Flaws and all,
Yep.
right? And a lot of people don't like to admit that guitar loudspeakers have flaws.
Yep.
And if you've ever looked at the frequency response of a guitar loudspeaker, and a lot of people haven't, but it becomes immediately obvious by looking at the frequency response
Oh yeah.
of a guitar speaker. I mean, it's pretty ugly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty rough.
Yeah. To say the least.
There are a lot of narrow band notches and peaks
Yep.
in the response, which you can't fix
Right.
with an EQ.
Right.
And some people will say, well, that's what gives a loudspeaker its character, and that's kind of the magic of a loudspeaker. And it all comes back to, look, if you...
right up till you don't actually like the sound
Yeah.
that thing gave you.
I mean, if you're trying to reproduce the sound of a specific speaker,
Right.
then yes, use an IR. But you're going to get all those flaws with it.
Right.
And it's not immediately obvious when you play through it, but you might notice after a while that you hear, like, there's a certain frequency that pops out sometimes,
Right.
and you just can't EQ it out.
Yep.
And that's
And you can't
right,
because it's
because it's some
built in,
narrow
yeah.
band little peak.
Yep.
And usually there's multiple, right? And so they're
Yeah.
just you're only gonna hear them sometimes. It depends on, what overtones
Right.
are in the particular chord you're playing and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, and this happens incidentally in instrument amplifiers as well with real life speakers, by the way. So I can say a thing or two about that. That we have had speakers that people will listen to and go, oh, it's just so bright, and the following day I have somebody going, oh, it's just so dark. there's the instrument to consider in the whole equation too, and the flaws of the speaker are flaws for one guitar and not flaws for another guitar. So you have people that love the sound of a specific speaker. And over the years, it got to the point where when people would email in and talk to me about a speaker in particular, I would ask them, hey, what kind of music are you playing? What instrument are you playing? Get used to, or get a picture in my head of what they're doing. And then I would literally go look through Celestion's catalog and start looking at frequency response curves and impedance curves and saying, this is probably the best one for you here. Because you can kind of guess that over time, because you develop an inherent kind of understanding of the flaws of the actual speaker itself. Well, the same thing has to apply to an impedance response. It has to.
Yeah.
So
then, the question is, well, how do you improve upon that?
Right.
And so, my theory is that you want a smooth response without all those little narrow band peaks and dips.
Right.
But that captures the overall shape of a loudspeaker cabinet. Right. So it drops off in the high frequencies, and gives you the attenuation you need to eliminate that fizz. And then on the low end, it also drops off the way a loudspeaker would.
Right.
With, a certain amount of control over, where those frequency points are, maybe, how quickly it drops off.
Right.
And things like that. And at the same time, now you can adjust those things. So maybe you get, something you like, and you can just kind of dial it in a little bit to get rid of a little more of that fizziness in the high end.
Right.
So, and it's probably easier just to demonstrate this. So let's go into the cab block, and we've got the default cab focused. I'm going to copy this into the custom mode. So I'll just quickly kind of go through the parameters that you have control over.
Yeah.
And so you probably noticed before I went into this that there are modes set up.
Right.
So for a lot of people, they're just going to go through and pick a mode that they like the sound of.
Yep, that's what I do.
And that's great. But if you want more control, then you can go into your custom mode. And on the first screen, you have control over the low frequency, where it drops off. So in hertz, this is the frequency at which it drops off. And then the Q of that filter, this determines how the low frequencies peak before they drop off.
Right.
So if you're above about 0.7, you get more of a peak as you increase it, and then below 0.7, it's much more gradual.
Which is good if you're trying to get gent going. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so this it kind of simulates maybe like a closed back versus an open back, or something like that.
Right.
And so it just, go ahead and play this.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
You can almost hear the back of the cabinet.
All right. Next screen. This controls the high frequency part of the cab.
Gotcha.
So you got three controls here. You've got the amount of attenuation above the frequency. So it's basically going to drop off until you get to minus 30 dB.
Okay.
And then it flattens off.
Got it.
And this lets you keep a little bit of that fizz.
Right.
Because sometimes maybe you want just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
The next parameter is the roll off, which you have fast, medium, and slow. This is just how quickly it rolls off. And then the last parameter is in kilohertz, where it starts to roll off. So this is probably the one that you're going to hear most easily. So let's try this.
Wow. You're not kidding.
let's see if we can hear the effect of the in dB. This is the amount of fizziness. It's a little more subtle.
Oh wow, yeah, definitely.
And then now let's hear the 3 different types of roll-off.
Wow, yeah, because it's really crisp with the yeah. Got it.
Okay. I hit the wrong button there. Okay. Next screen. We were on high. Is okay, damping factor. So this kind of mimics the effect of how an amplifier drives a loudspeaker.
Right.
It's the damping factor of the amplifier driving the loudspeaker. And so maybe you've heard that like tube amplifiers have a low damping factor.
Right.
And solid state have a high damping factor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not really completely accurate because there are things you can do with a solid state amplifier to lower the damping factor. But that being said,
I know some people that have, yeah.
Yeah, we know people who have done that. That being said, I went ahead and added this parameter to kind of emulate the effect of the damping factor. And essentially what this does is it imposes the impedance curve of the loudspeaker on the response.
Which is one of the kind of unsung heroes of what makes a speaker behave the way it does, actually. So good.
Well, especially a guitar speaker, when it's driven with low damping factor or a solid state amp with damping reduction.
Right.
That's that's why you do that. Is it imposes the response of the impedance curve, so you're probably wondering, like, what does that mean?
Right.
So, and the impedance curve of an amplifier of a loudspeaker, it'll have a peak in the low frequencies and then drop off and then sort of very gradually rise at high frequencies.
Right.
And if you think about it, that's kind of similar to something like a loudness curve.
Kind of.
Right? Or just taking the EQ on your hi-fi system and dropping the mids out, right? It's like, it just makes it sound bigger and fuller.
Yep.
So by reducing this control, that's essentially what you're doing.
Right.
You're just, it's dropping some of the mids out, giving that little bit of boost in the lows with that sort of very gradual increase in the highs. Just makes it sound more full. So go ahead and play something and we'll turn the knob.
Wow, it almost feels loose. There's a feel to it. I'll say that much. I feel it when you turn it more than hear it, really.
Yeah. So it's kind of subtle because it doesn't really change it by more than maybe a few dB here and there. But it is.
But you feel it.
You
do feel it. I'll tell you that much.
And that's it. That's everything in the cab block. I mean, it's pretty simple, not too many controls, but there's a lot of flexibility in those controls.
Well, and so you can get, like I said, my experience is dialing it in. You go for that gain first, get there, dial your cab in, and you're 90% of the way there. We do have someone that posted in and said, IRs sound good when the variables amp, EQ, output, speaker between the image captured and your settings are the same. IRs sound good. We're not actually, I don't think we're saying IRs are bad or not the way. They're their own complication. I kind of is my 2 cents.
Yeah.
If your IR is working for you and you have exactly what you want, nobody's saying you're bad. You're awesome.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you like the sound of your IR, then that's what you should use. It just, for some people, it's a little bit of a battle trying to find one that they like.
Well, and that's one of the complications. There's it's one of the, having this conversation with someone the other day, just saying, what does the Elevate do that's different? Is it just shortens the path from A to B.
Right.
So rather
Yeah.
than having to learn your way through all this stuff and go to college and whatever it may be to achieve a given tone, instead of having to do all that and import this and do that, you can just touch a knob and be there in a few seconds. When you're recording, invaluable, because I don't want to have to reset my amp if I'm using an actual live amp with a microphone. I don't want to have to go in and reset it. And if I'm just trying to sketch down an idea, I want to be able to get the tone I want without the complications of going, well, okay, I got to change IRs or whatnot, or change my preset or change my patches. You can reach over and grab a knob and just do it and have those effects almost instantly. So yeah, that I don't think anyone. It's a controversial thing for sure to say that IRs are complicated, but I'll refer back to it's a shaky ground to begin with. Real speakers, real amplifiers. I have a lot of experience with that. It's hard to get your tone the way you want it to. It's a reality with the real devices. It can't be any easier with digital devices, and I've used IRs too, so I can say with certainty. Mostly I've discovered it's kind of difficult for me personally.
So let's see so we were asked, could I run this in the effects loop of my Quilter Aviator?
You should.
So this is really kind of made to be like a full guitar rig.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could put this in the effects loop of something, but you're kind of doubling up on some of the functionality.
Yeah.
So the results might be a little unpredictable.
Well, if I were going to do it, I'll throw it out there for you. First off, I'd run it in the front end of the amplifier. A lot of times I get questions.
I think it depends on what you want to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So like if you wanted to use this as just an effects unit,
then by all means.
Then you can put it in the effects loop.
Yeah, do that. That's when it makes sense. If you wanted to use it without cab simulation on, so you're not basically doubling up on what the amplifier and cab is doing, then just turn the cab mode off. Build yourself a preset around that and run it into the front end. Don't complicate your life.
Yeah.
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 And Bob's your uncle, as Pat would always say. Okay. Everything on this unit are presets, no stomp mode, Doc McFarland says. And I think he's referring to, we could do the zoom out where we were showing the MIDI Maestro. This technically is a fact up. We covered this in a previous video. We have the... we have the capability to turn on or off individual functions using a MIDI controller. In fact, I'll pull it out and we can...
Yeah, so while he's doing this, I'll kind of explain some of the rationale behind why there's no stomp mode like on the unit itself without a MIDI controller. And that is that we've already got multiple functions on the foot switches. And so by adding another mode to have like a stomp box mode would just make it, in our opinion, it just made it too complicated.
Yep.
So we decided to make this functionality accessible with a MIDI controller. So with a MIDI controller, you can enable or disable any of the blocks.
Yeah, which is what I'm doing right now, actually. So it's definitely something you can do. So you can have your, what's the old slogan? Is it Burger King or McDonald's? Have it your way. You can have it your way. Okay, I'm looking.
Very cool. Merges my guitar playing mind with my sound engineer mind.
Oh,
I think that's
that's well said.
Yeah.
You're going to get exactly what you want on that one, I promise. It's so cool to, especially if you're recording. I got to tell you that whatever sound is in your head, 5 seconds later, you're worried about making the take and not worried about trying to dial that sound in perfectly. It's pretty awesome.
So a question just came in. You have to buy a MIDI controller to turn off the reverb. So if you only want to turn off the reverb, the easy way to set that up is using the AB.
Yeah.
So you have an A with the reverb on, you have a B with the reverb off.
Yep.
And there's your reverb off switch.
I mean, if you think about most songs, like if you're playing in a cover band, if you're playing in an originals band, you want to have a bunch of reverb, on one particular part of the song. On the second part of the song, there's no reverb. You want clean and boosted distortion, right? Dirty clean or whatever have you. That's kind of the beauty behind thinking of the thinking of this product was really from the standpoint of playing a song, and if you play a song, almost inevitably you have to play two types of sounds within that song. And that's kind of where the A-B function is. Every preset is two presets. So you can just copy one preset to the second one, say you just need to be boosted and make it louder. Or you want it boosted louder and a different kind of reverb altogether. You can do all of that and more, so that all you have to really do now, instead of tap dance on your reverb pedal, tap dance on your delay pedal, you just hit B and it switches you over to, for example, something that has echo and reverb to something that's all gain and you're just, ripping out a solo or vice versa, or whatever may be the case. So it's your need, like if I think of 90% of the work I've ever done as a guitarist, it's I just don't need to tap on a bunch of things. Like I bought a crocodile tail looper, and I would have presets that would turn on or off pedals for me because I only tap dance so well and I only play guitar so well, as you've already heard. So the real trick, I think, here is just being able to not have to turn on or off a bunch of functions, but get exactly the sound you need for that part of the song. The only complication might be if you have a song where you have to have 4 different food groups of tone. And if that's the case, you can actually preload a secondary patch and just turn on the A when you're ready to go and turn on the B when you're ready for the 4th part of the song. It's a workaround for sure. Or you can get a MIDI controller if you want reverb off on that particular patch. For a lot of people that think in terms of food, I just need to have a sound. You can certainly do that, get a MIDI controller, knock yourself out. But you can just do that and have an A-B just the same way. And it's so much easier.
So there is another way
what you
turn the reverb on and off. Is you can use the expression controller.
Oh, yeah.
And you could actually just use an expression switch for that. And so the reverb mix can be assigned to the expression controller.
Oh, how quickly I forget. He's right.
And then with just a simple, one button expression switch,
right,
connected to the expression input, that'll turn the reverb on and off.
Yeah. And so there's other options. But, I say you can kind of set this up however you want. If you really want to have control over every function for a given preset, you would need an external MIDI controller, or if you're just trying to control one function, you can set yourself up that way. So,
and you can assign the echo mix to the expression controller as well. So
for those of you Bonos out there, not Bono, but the Edge players out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's see. We have any other questions, or is that it?
I think we're actually we're right at an hour right now anyway. If you got any questions, ask them now. Otherwise, we're going to roll on.
So I guess while we're waiting, what do you got planned for next week?
Next week, we're bringing Pat in. So we're going to talk a bit about the Direct Amp, another product that Quilter Labs Pat designed, some years ago now, which is kind of the spiritual successor to the Phantom Block. So the Pat's got an interesting story about kind of how he came up with the Phantom Block and a bit about how the Direct Amp is designed and kind of what it is, why it is, and it'll be kind of fun. The one product we actually put the name Amp in has no amplifier. It's made to go direct into the PA system, so it'll be kind of a fun time with Pat, and who knows what, feel free to ask questions now that we can, if you have any questions you want to ask Pat, we like to talk about all sorts of things. You never know where we're going to go with this thing. So I can say, with all that said, you got one more, or are we good? Crickets.
Crickets. I don't wait.
One just came in.
Oh no, it's just a comment.
All righty. Well, with all that said, I think we're ready to roll to the outro. And thank you guys for coming again, and appreciate your questions. And thank you for your time. And
Yep.
see you at the next
Thanks,
Q
everyone.
show.
I found peace, loving on those who hate me. I found joy, raising babies with an angel on earth. I found worthless, saving dollars on a rock in space. I